Yes, it does, Pat. Greatness does have a presence. I'm your host, Peter Pac-Man Clark, aka the Sports God, aka and we are here for another episode of Pac Sports Zone. And we're going to be running down a lot of things today, mostly football as we get into our 8 weeks of talking over the divisions and talking over every team in the league, going over pretty much every position for them, whether I'm going over the secondary, their linebackers, their D-line, offensive line, their wideouts, their running backs, quarterbacks, everything. So there's going to be a lot of football talk over the next couple of weeks, but just to get it out of the way, we want to talk a little bit about wrestling and what happened over the past weekend and what's coming up this next weekend. Forbidden Door, not really much to really talk about. It was obviously a good wrestling pay-per-view. It was a lot of good athletes. It was just a good show. In terms of stuff to bring out of it, I mean, Pac won the All-Atlantic title. They have way too many belts and championships on there anyway, but he does win the Atlantic title. The newest member of the Blackpool Combat Club was Cesaro, now named Claudio Castelloni. He was also on 2 days ago on AEW Dynamite in just a war of a main event if you want to go and see that. Lots of blood, lots of good wrestling, but something that I would suggest you go and watch if you do like that type of old school wrestling stuff. It was a good match. Also, Jay White, the Switchblade, retains his IWGP Heavyweight title as he was able to get the win over in the Fatal 4-Way match that involved Okada, Adam Cole, as well as Hangman Page. And Jon Moxley wins the AEW Heavyweight title. Moving on to WWE this weekend, Saturday, tomorrow, we're going to see Money in the Bank. There are 6 matches on the card. Really, there's only 2 that really care about because, I mean, nobody really going to care much about the Bianca versus Carmella because Bianca is obviously going to win that match. Ronda versus Natalya. Ronda's likely going to win that match. Usos, I don't see them dropping the title. Theory and Bobby Lashley is really a who cares because it's for the United States title. It's not for the heavyweight title. This event is about 2 matches. It's the Money in the Bank women's and Money in the Bank men's. And the Money in the Bank women's is already set. You have Lacey Evans, Alexa Bliss, Liv Morgan, Rachel Rodriguez, Asuka, Shotzi Blackheart, and Becky Lynch. And to me, it comes down to just 2 people, Liv Morgan and Becky Lynch. WWE social media has promoted Liv Morgan a lot. I know she has her groundswell of fans that really want her to win the title, so you can see her cashing in and winning the main of Money in the Bank and then cashing in to win the title. Obviously the favorite to do it would be Becky Lynch unless they want to continue the Asuka and Becky Lynch back and forth that's been happening. And I think that's a possibility. And that's why I'm going to pick Liv Morgan to win the women's Money in the Bank. On the men's side, Seth Rollins, I'm not going to say Seth freaking Rollins, screw all that stuff. It's Seth Rollins, Drew McIntyre, Sheamus, Omos, Sami Zayn, Riddle, and somebody else to be added tonight. Not sure who that's going to be. Listen, that can go numerous ways. It'll be funny if Sami Zayn won, because then you can see, is he going to cash in on Roman? Because when Roman faced against Brock at SummerSlam, and I did confuse that last week. I want to correct that. I thought they were going to actually be fighting at Money in the Bank. They're going to be fighting at SummerSlam, but it would be funny to see Sami Zayn try to decide, all right, man, am I going to cash it in now? I think it's going to be Riddle. And the reason why is because of a weird way. We already had Riddle go against Roman, and they had the match that if Riddle lost, he can never challenge for that title. And I would assume that also means with the Money in the Bank. So with that being said, the way to keep Roman from getting cashed in on is to give somebody the Money in the Bank that can't cash it in. So I think it makes the most sense to have Riddle win that title, Roman hold on to the title, and he doesn't have to worry about it being cashed in because Riddle can't challenge for the title. So those are my 2 picks for Money in the Bank. That'll be Liv Morgan with the women's Money in the Bank, and that will be Riddle winning the men's Money in the Bank. So with that out of the way, we got to talk about football. Today's going to be a 2-part episode. So, because it's going to be way too much for one show. Later on, I'm going to be talking to Mark Malusis, formerly of WFAN, now with Pix 11 Sports. Great guy, is friend of the show. He's going to be talking about everything, whether it's the Rangers, Jets. We'll get into a conversation about everything with him. Before that, on this first part show, I want to talk about the NFC East because, as I said, each week we're going to be going over each division, and going over every single team, different parts of their team, what do they need, what are they weak on, stuff and like that. And we're going to start off with the NFC East, and just like I'm going to talk with Mark later and ask him first about the Giants, I'm going to start off with the Giants because we're in the Northeast, we're in the New Jersey, New York area. So, looking at the Giants roster, let's start on the defense because I think that is their weaker side of the ball. You look at their defensive line, they have good guys on the defensive line, to be honest, because I love Dexter Lawrence. He's a big run stuffer. He's just one of those guys that's a really good player in the middle of the line. Leonard Williams, he can do everything when he's motivated, so he's another good person to have in the middle of the line. Now, keep in mind, I'm saying the middle of the line, even though they play outside of the line because they run a 3-4. The reason why I'm saying interior line, because more than 50% of the time, every team in the league is going to run nickel or dime defense. So you're going to have 4 down D linemen. So those D tackles are going to be in the middle with the pass rushers on the outside. So when the Giants do that, they're going to have their second round pick from last year, Aziz, in the middle. And then they're going to have their first round pick, Thibodeau, on the outside with Aziz and Thibodeau on the outside with Leonard Williams and Dexter Lawrence in the middle. If you look at that line on paper, I think that's actually a good line. Now, they have no depth. They're not good enough to have depth yet, but I think that's a really good D line. When you move on to the linebackers, I think it gets a little weaker because Blake Martinez, good tackler. He'll be all over the field, but he can't cover anybody. And Tay Crowder is their other starter, and in my opinion, he's not that good. So that's one part of their defense that really is going to need help. They really need another linebacker, especially a coverage linebacker on that team. When you look in their secondary, they're very young. You obviously have their second round pick, Xavier McKinnon, from 2 years ago at safety. You have Julian Love, who I think is actually a better cornerback than safety, but he's more needed at safety on this team. He's very versatile where he can do that. And then the cornerbacks, you got Aaron Robinson, Adoree Jackson, and Darnay Holmes, who are all at least solid and okay where I think you're fine there. So when you look over the whole defense, I think they just need another linebacker in there who's going to be that top guy. He's going to be the top-notch first-round type pick that he's going to take over and be the quarterback of that defense. Then you switch over to the offensive side of the ball. Obviously, you got to start with Daniel Jones. I'm not a fan of him. I think this will be his last year on the Giants. Unless he surprises me personally, I think the Giants are going to have a year where they'll probably be picking around 10th. I don't think they're going to be bad to where they're picking top 5, but I do think they'll be picking around the 10th pick. Other than that, you look at their offensive line. They have Andrew Thomas. That was their first round pick 2 years ago. And on the right side, you draft Evan Neal this year. That'll be in the first round, that'll be their right tackle. You went out and got Mark Lewinsky from the Colts to be a right guard. Good player. No problem with him. They also went out and got John Feliciano, who I think he's not a person that you're going to look at long term. You're going to look at him for right now. He's going to be okay. I mean, he's a solid veteran. I don't think he's somebody you're going to look to be on the team 2 years from now, but he's good as a fellow right now. At left guard right now, they got Shane Lemieux. He has talent. He has shown that he can do that, but he's always injured. So they do have a couple people that they have that may be able to fill in for him. They have a couple rookies that they drafted third round. So I think they'll be fine on offensive line. I think it's the best line they've actually had for the past couple of years, but they still have some work to go. Moving on to the running back, obviously is Saquon Barkley. He's another year removed from his major surgery on his knee. I think he's going to have a good bounce back year. I think he could be in line for a 1,200, 1,300 rushing yard year. They went and drafted now moving from that, you don't have much behind him. So he's going to have to stay healthy. Moving on to their pass catchers, you got Galladay, you got Tony, you got Shepard. They drafted Wan'Dale Robinson in the second round, and they also drafted tight end Daniel Bellinger in the fourth round. Everything with their wide receivers. I think their wide receivers are fine. I think Galladay is better than he showed last year. Tony has talent. I'm not as high on him as everybody else is, but he does have talent. Shepard is lucky to be on the team. If he didn't take a pay cut to pretty much minimum salary, he wouldn't be on the team. I think Wan'Dale Robinson will be in that top 3 wide receivers by the time the year is done. And we'll see how the tight ends work out, because tight ends are one of the most unpredictable positions to pick out. You just look around the league. There's hardly any first round tight ends that end up producing the way they were supposed to produce. Most of the time it's second, third, fourth round tight ends. So that's very unpredictable to pick out. So when you look at this team as a whole, they have parts where you can look toward the future and say, all right, we're a year away from at least not being a bad team where we may be able to contend for the playoffs, but they got to get their quarterback right. They have to maybe get another offensive lineman, and they got to get another inside linebacker to try to be the quarterback of that defense. I think if they get those 3 things within the next year, then you can start about possibly the Giants being that team that you can start saying, all right, maybe we can make a playoff run. Moving on to the next team in the NFC East, the Dallas Cowboys. And when you look at their team, there is really not much weaknesses. I mean, you look at their defensive line, and they got DeMarcus Lawrence, they got Dante Fowler, they got Dorrance Armstrong, they went and drafted Sam Williams, so they got pass rushers galore. You look on the inside of their defensive line, and you got Gallimore, and you got Odighizuwa, you got Tristan Hill, you got everything that you kind of want on that defensive line with pass rushers, run stoppers. They just got to stay healthy. On the linebackers, obviously it's Micah Parsons, and Micah Parsons is showed that he's already on that great level of top players already, even after just 1 year. And next to him, you got injury prone, but still a solid player in Leighton Vander Esch. Behind him, you got Jabril Cox, who I think is going to make a good step up this year for that second year player at 4th round pick out of LSU. In the secondary, Anthony Brown played solid. He had his ups and downs, but he's a solid player at that cornerback. Trayvon Diggs, I think, is a little bit overrated, but he is a solid cornerback. Jordan Lewis has always been good as a nickelback. He's always good in the slot. Malik Hooker, when he's healthy, he's really good. I remember all those years at Ohio State. I remember him with the Colts. When he's healthy, he's good. And then they got Jaron Kearse, who's also a solid, strong safety there. So when you look at their defense, they don't really have much weaknesses. They just have to play up to their level of ability and see how it goes from there. But they really can't pick out a weakness there. When you look on the offense, there's not much weaknesses, but I'll get to their big weakness, in my opinion, what I think can bring them down. You have a top 5 quarterback, top 7 quarterback, whatever you want to place him in Dak Prescott. He's pretty much, over the last 2 years, he's had about 5 bad games. That's pretty much it. But they've come at the worst times because they come at the end of the year, and that kills them. So, I think as long as he's able to stay healthy and stay consistent, I think he'll be fine. You have your running backs there with Zeke Elliott and with Tony Pollard, so you're fine there too. This year, now without Amari Cooper and without Cedric Wilson, you got a little bit of a difference in the wideout. I think you have CeeDee Lamb, who's a number 1 wideout, definitely. He's good enough to be that guy. And you got Michael Gallup, who's coming off an injury, so he's going to have to be brought along a little bit slower. And then you look at the guys behind that, like James Washington. You're not really that confident in James Washington. He has talent, but you don't want him starting. Let's put it that way. They went and drafted Jalen Tolbert in the 3rd round, so he may get a little bit more play. We'll see if he gets more of a chance, because that Gallup may be brought along slowly as the year starts. You look at their tight end, Dalton Schultz is good. They drafted Jake Ferguson on the 4th round of this year's draft. So they have parts. They have people to throw it to. They got people to hand the ball off to, and they got somebody to throw it. Biggest question for them is going to be our offensive line. Now, obviously, Tyron Smith is one of the top 5 left tackles in the league. Zach Martin is arguably the top 2 guard in the league with Quentin Nelson. You've got center is Tyler Badaz. He's good. I like him. And pretty much I've said, if you heard me here in the past talk about Wisconsin offensive linemen, you can't really go wrong. So Tyler's going to be fine at center. But they used their 1st round pick on Tyler Smith. He's going to be playing left guard, and we'll see if he can live up to what they need him to live up to. I think he's good. I think a lot of people got on him for that draft pick because most people look at him as a second round pick. But you know what? This is what they knew as one of their big weaknesses. Their big weakness was left guard and right tackle. And they wanted to take care of one of those positions early, and they went and did that. They went and got Tyler Smith, and he's going to be the left guard. Right tackle, Terrence Steele, not so much. I'm not confident in him. I think that could be their issue. I think if they can find a way to patchwork that right tackle, I think the Cowboys will be fine, and they should be the favorites to win the division. I just don't know if, one, you got to look at health. They don't have as much depth on the offensive side of the ball. And you got to watch out for the offensive line because you got a rookie at left guard and you got somebody who I don't think is that great at right tackle. So you kind of hesitate when you see things like that to important positions like offensive line and defensive line. As we move on to the next team in the NFC East, the Washington Commanders, as I try to get used to saying that instead of the other name, you start on their defense, and I talked last year about how good their defense was, and you kind of have to blame their defensive coordinator, Jack Del Rio, for them not producing the way they should, because you look at their front seven, and there's no weakness in their front seven. You look at Chase Young, Deron Payne, Jonathan Allen, and Montez Sweat on the D-line with Davis and Holcomb at linebacker. You shouldn't have any problem with those six. And then when you move on past that, then you look at their secondary and you got Kendall Fuller, who's a good player. You got William Jackson, who's a good player coming from Cincinnati a year ago. Benjamin St-Juste, they think he's going to be a breakout star this year as at cornerback. Cameron Curl, they think he's going to be a solid player. He's been good on special teams. They think he's going to be a good starting safety there. Bobby McClain has been a solid, good safety in the past. I think that in their mind, their defense doesn't really need any work. Obviously, they drafted Mathis in the second round on the D line to help out there. They drafted Percy Butler in the fourth round as secondary to help out behind McCain and Curl, but they don't really need much on defense. Their defense, in my opinion, if they're coached well, should be a good defense, should be a top 10 defense. What you're going to look at with this team is the offense. And the offensive line, I'm going to start out with that because Charles Leno Jr., we've seen him for years with the Bears as left tackle. He's an average left tackle. He's still an average left tackle. He hasn't changed. I think you have to worry about that. Andrew Norwell, they got him from Jacksonville. He's an okay guy. He's not great, so you have to worry about that. At center, they're fine with Rollier. He's fine. Trey Turner is okay. He's not great. And Sam Cosma is their second-round pick from last year. So you look at their line, and they have so many gaps and so many holes in that spot. You have to wonder how they're going to protect their quarterback, their brand-new quarterback that he just traded for, Carson Wentz. And that brings me to that position where, obviously, Carson Wentz has not been good over the past couple of years since he left Philadelphia. He had the 1-year stint in Indianapolis. That didn't work out with a coach that he was familiar with, and Frank Reich. Now he moves on to his third team in 3 years, and I just don't see it changing. So you're in a defense that has some really good defensive teams. Dallas, I just mentioned them. We'll get to the Eagles in a second. I just don't know how he makes bad decisions. He rushes throws. I just don't like Carson Wentz. So you're already off to a horrible start because you have offensive linemen that have about 2 or 3 holes on the offensive line. And then the quarterback that has been very iffy over the past couple of years. Logan Thomas comes back at tight end, but he's been injured a lot in the past couple of years. At wideout now, this is the part where you're actually good. At wideout, they just re-signed Terry McLaurin to a 3-year extension, $81 million, so they're fine there. You look at Johan Dotson, who they took in the first round, fine there. I like him. I thought they took him a little bit high, but he's still a first-round worthy player, maybe end of first round in my opinion. Curtis Samuel coming back off injury. He seems to be solid, and I always liked him at Ohio State. I think he has the speed with Dotson and McLaurin that you're going to have a lot of speed out there. So that's fine. And then at running back, you got Antonio Gibson. So I think you're fine for those positions. Your skilled positions are really good. They're really fast. Pretty much everybody that I just named between McLaurin, Dotson, Samuel, and Gibson run a sub 4.4. So you're talking about speed everywhere, but you need a quarterback to get the ball out, and you need a quarterback that's going to be protected. And those are the two things that they're missing right now. And just because of that, they're going to be in a lot of low scoring games because they're going to have trouble scoring. However, their defense should be so good that they should keep them in games. But like I said, Del Rio was not a good defensive coordinator last year. We'll see if he can motivate them differently this year, or if things go south real quickly, and maybe he won't have a job in a year. Moving on to the last team of these four teams, I wanted to talk about the Philadelphia Eagles in the NFC East. Now, when you look at the defense with them, they're one of those guys that don't have spectacular guys that stand out. However, they have guys that work good as a team. They know their role. On the D-line, you have Brandon Ingram and you have Derek Barnett trying to get to the quarterback. You don't see either one of them having a 15-sack year, but they can both get around 8 to 10 sacks. You got Fletcher Cox and Javon Hargrove in the middle. Then obviously they used the first-round pick on the monstrous Jordan Davis out of Georgia. He's going to be in that line really soon. I expect him to be replacing Javon Hargrove really fast because he is a complete monster. At linebacker, you got TJ Edwards in the middle. They went out there and got Hassan Reddick, who's a good pass rusher. They went and got Nakobe Dean in the third round, who seemed to be a steal because he was everywhere on that defense at Georgia. So they went out and just took half of Georgia's defense. So, and two of their best players on defense. You put him with Kaiser White. And they're very, very deep at linebacker. Then you look at their safeties. Anthony Harris has been great for Minnesota for years, tagging up with Harrison Smith in Minnesota. He now comes over and he's in the secondary for them, going along with Marcus Epps, who they expect more out of him. He's a guy that, along with Kayvon Wallace, is going to be fighting for that starting safety position. It looks like it's going to be Marcus Epps, but they need one of them to come through and step up, and they think it's going to be Marcus Epps. At the cornerback position, they still got Darius Slay, who's very good. James Bradbury, they just got from the Giants once the Giants finally got rid of him. And Avonte Maddox, they have playing the nickelback. So they don't really have too many big weaknesses on defense either. And that's kind of going back to what I said against the Washington Commanders. You have a person in Carson Wentz, and pretty much this whole division, you have to worry about quarterback. Dak by far is the best quarterback in the division. And second, I'm going to be getting to in a second with Jalen Hurts. And then you got Daniel Jones and Carson Wentz, who, especially Carson Wentz, because he's behind a makeshift line, it could be a long year for him. But as I spoke earlier, Jalen Hurts, I think, is going to be the second best quarterback in this league. In this division. And he has Miles Sanders behind him. They like to run the ball a lot. Hopefully Miles Sanders can stay healthy, despite him hating fantasy football players. Might not want to draft him because of that, but he is a solid back. He makes good football decisions. They just need to give him more touches. On the outside, I love their wide receivers. You have A.J. Brown, obviously. Devontae Smith is a beast. Quez Watkins is always behind the defense. You saw that a lot last year. And then you got Zach Pasquale behind him. Greg Ward is a solid guy, especially if he's going to be a 4th-5th guy. I'm not a fan of Jalen Reagor. I don't know if he'll be on a roster after this year, but they have a lot of good wide receivers, and they're fast wide receivers because Smith and Watkins can get behind the defense in a second. So those two with A.J. Brown, who's a beast in the middle, especially if you put him in like the slot, that you have your people to throw to when you add in Dallas Goedert at tight end. So he should have no lack of weapons when you have Sanders, Goddard, Brown, Smith, Watkins all out there, even with more wide receivers behind that. There's no excuse for Jalen Hurts. Then you look at their offensive line. Listen, one of the best stories on this team is Jordan Mailata. He was a former rugby player. He got taken in the 7th round of the draft in 2018, and now he signed a year or two ago. He signed a 4-year extension where he's getting paid big bucks because he has been such a great player on that left side. He's on there. You got Landon Dickinson, who was their 2nd-round pick last year. He can play both center and guard. He's playing left guard, and he's playing left guard because they got Jason Kels at center, who's one of the top-notch centers in the league. Obviously, Lane Johnson has been one of the stalwart right tackles in the league, one of the best in the league. And Isaac Sumalo is somebody who's a veteran. I think if they were going to replace somebody, he would be that next guy that gets replaced on the offensive line. But he's a veteran. He's solid. He can stay there for right now. I think that now, when you look at this division from top to bottom, most people are going to have it as Dallas, Philadelphia, Washington, New York. I'm close to putting it that way. However, I'm going to make a little switch at the top, and I'll tell you why. I'm going to pick Philadelphia first. I'm going to pick Dallas second, Washington third, Giants fourth. The reason why I'm going to put Philadelphia first is just from track history of the teams, seeing how the coaches coach those teams. I just have more confidence because this division typically comes down to the last month of the season. It's usually a 1-game lead by Dallas, or 2-game lead by Dallas, and it's coming down the stretch, and we're seeing if they could win those games to hold on to the division, and it's usually like a 1-game win. Down the stretch, I have more confidence in the Philadelphia team and coaches than I do in the Dallas team and coaches, just because of what they've shown me in the past. On paper, Dallas should be easily the best team in this division and should be the best team by 2 or 3 games. But when you play on the field, and you see how these players have reacted to each other and how they react to pressure, I just think the Philadelphia Eagles play better with pressure than the Dallas Cowboys do. So I'm going to pick the Philadelphia Eagles to win the division, Dallas Cowboys to probably lose by a game, if not even a tiebreaker, because of those head-to-head matchups or conference divisional record, something like that. And then I think the Washington Commanders will be third and the New York Giants fourth. But I do think the Giants do have a chance to be third. I think the biggest issue with the Giants is that it's just Daniel Jones. I think if Daniel Jones can put together a solid season, I think they'll be right around the 500 mark. I think then they can win 8 or 9 games. But if he has a year that I think he's probably going to have, then they could be around 5 games, 6 games. I think that's just how it'll be. You look at the Washington Commanders, and I think they will be around that 7-win mark. So it's going to be right there in the middle, where it'll be better to win where I think the Giants will be, but it's not better than what I think the Giants have the ability to do. I think no matter what, I think the Commanders are going to be around that 7-win mark. I got to think the Eagles will be around, I would say, 11 wins. And I would say the Cowboys, same thing, right around 11 wins. I think if either one of those teams get to 12, I think they'd win the division. But I think it's going to come down to the last 2 games of the season again. Cowboys and Eagles, last couple games of the season to decide the division. That's just how it is. In a little bit, like I said, it will be a part 2 of this episode. I will be having Mark Malusas on. He will be speaking about a little bit we'll talk about a little bit about everything. Cause listen, he's a great sports mind. He can talk about hockey. He can talk about football. He can talk about horse racing. So I'll be talking with him a little bit later, in the part 2. This is just the part 1, just giving my analysis on the NFC East. And then part 2 will be pretty much entirely the interview with him, and we'll go from there. But with that said, NFC, for the future of this podcast for the next couple of weeks, as I said, I'm going to try to have maybe 1 or 2 reporters each week, and then talk about what we think about each division. Next week, we'll see if it's either going to be the AFC North, depending on if the Deshaun Watson situation gets settled, or the AFC South. Maybe we'll have my friend Jim Wyatt on there. But we'll be back again next week with that, as we talk to somebody else also and talk about another division, and we go over it team by team, what I think is going to happen, what do teams need, what do they don't need. But with that said, let's go on to part 2 of this episode, where you'll be able to hear Mark Malusas go over everything with my interview with him. For this part of the episode, part 1, thank you for listening, and listen on for part 2.